Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make a bioactive terrarium. Cheap and easy. Let's get into it, shall we? So all you need for a bioactive tank is 5 things: soil, leaf litter, cleanup crew, plants, and lighting. Now some people add a drainage layer, most people do, however I do not. I have in the past, but it really doesn't matter, and it makes no difference if you do or you don't. A drainage layer is supposed to help keep the soil from becoming oversaturated with water. As long as you don't overwater, you will be good. A little trick, and it's very easy to prevent overwatering: if it looks wet and moist, do not water. If it looks dry, go ahead and water. Now for Arid bioactive enclosures, I do sort of the same thing, but I let the soil get pretty dry before I dump water in the enclosure. That's also the difference between the tropical and desert bioactive terrariums. For the desert enclosures, I just dump water all in the enclosure and soak the soil. You don't really have to worry about humidity that much either, because after a few days, everything returns back to normal. This is also very good for a lot of animals as well, because you're simulating natural rainfall a lot more instead of keeping it dry 24/7. One of the most important things for a bioactive terrarium is lighting. Now, a lot of people think that if you just get UVB lighting for your lizard, that's going to be enough. That is not enough. You need full spectrum LED daylight lighting, and you can get this honestly anywhere. I get mine at Walmart and Home Depot. I honestly just get a lot of shop lights. There's like shop lights. You want something that's like 5,000 to 6,500 Kelvin. You'll see it on the thing, and you have to make sure it's daylight, LED daylight bulb. It's super bright white. It mimics the sun, and it will grow your plants. You don't need expensive jungle dawns to grow your plants. If you want to grow plants, just any LED will work. Heck, even like some cheap strip lights will work, but they don't look as good as the daylight. So now that I talked about the just main components of a bioactive terrarium, I'm gonna go ahead and show you how I am gonna set up a bioactive terrarium. Very easy. Let's get to it, shall we? So all you need is an empty tank. You can add a background if you want, but you don't have to. First thing you will add to this, if you do go with one, is a drainage layer. Again, I don't use drainage layers at all anymore, but you can if you want to. I use some of this substratum. You can use other things like river rocks, hydro balls, lava rock. There's tons of options. But if you do use a drainage layer, you will need to use a substrate barrier. This is so that way your soil doesn't mix with your rocks, and it just pretty much doesn't do what it's supposed to do, which is drain water from the soil. After that, you can go ahead and add your soil on top. But like I said, I'm not using a drainage layer, so moving on to just adding soil. For soil, you can use something like Repti soil. You can put a little place sand in there, but I make my own for only $10. All I do is I buy peat moss, that's organic, and play sand. I mix it together at a 70-30 ratio, with sand being 30%, and this is what I use for all of my bioactive tanks. I wouldn't recommend something like cocoa fiber or just regular desert sand for stuff. It's just not going to work that well. You want a good mix of soil. Lots of reptile companies sell their own bioactive substrate, so if you don't want to mix it or do anything like that, I'll have that linked in the description. Now, since you have your soil, you can go ahead and dump in at least 3 inches of soil into your tank. You want some deep substrate so that way you can help the plants take root, and springtails and isopods have a place to hide and dig around. Then you can get your plant. For this build, I'm going to be using a pothos, and I got this at Walmart. You get it at Home Depot or Lowe's or garden stores. It's a really good plant because it can go in any tank, even Arid enclosures. But what I like to do is take it out of the pot, break it up, knock off all the soil, and a lot of times when you do this, you're going to realize that you have like 3 plants in one little pot. So I'll take 2 of those plants. I'm going to put one on one side of the tank and another on the other side. It's going to make it look nice and filled in. And then I had another plant in my house, and I'm gonna add it to the middle so it's a nice little centerpiece. After that, you can get leaf litter. I'm not gonna lie to you, these leaves are just straight from my backyard. You can use leaves from outside as long as they don't have any bugs on them and they're not getting sprayed with poison. These are from my backyard. No one's spraying anything out there, and it's just me taking them from outside. Again, if you're scared, I will have leaf litter linked in the description that you can buy on Amazon. But this is very important for tropical enclosures. You want to cover all of the soil with leaf litter. I kind of grind it up in my hands too, because what this is going to do is going to trap the humidity inside of the tank. That way you don't always have to mist it. You don't have to worry about that. It's going to keep the humidity in the soil, and that way you don't have to always mist. A lot of people always complain like, I can't keep humidity up. The soil dries out. This will help with that. After that, I put some hides. I'm using cork bark as hides. You can use whatever you want as hides, but I put 3 hides in the enclosure, and then I'm gonna add some rocks. Now, rocks are extremely important, but we'll get to that. It's more important for arid enclosure especially, but I like to add some in here as well because isopods love to hide underneath the rocks. And then we're gonna go ahead and top it off with a nice branch that I found outside as well. I cut it off of a tree. Again, if you want some branches, I'll have everything that you can make your own kit with linked in the description. Add the water bowl and we're almost done. All we need now is the cleanup crew and we'll talk about the lighting. So for this, I went ahead and used some springtails. I breed my own springtails and I just grab them out of here. You can kind of see them. If you look really closely, they're very tiny. And I just grab a dump of dirt and I'll throw it in here and they'll breed in here as well. And for isopods, I'm gonna use some common regular isopods. I love these guys because they're very tolerant of arid enclosures. I use these guys for my arid enclosures as well. So after you add the cleanup crew, all you need now is lighting. So depending on what type of species you put in a bioactive tank, one thing is for certain, and that you will need an LED daylight fixture so your plants will grow. Again, any LED light will grow plants. You don't need a fancy grow light. You don't need a specific type. Any LED daylight bulb will grow your plants. And that's the important part. It has to be a daylight LED. I legit go buy these super cheap LED lights at Walmart. They have grown every bioactive tank you see in this video. Now for the setup of the lights, you can honestly put the LED anywhere on the tank, but I will say this, for most of my tanks, since I do have a lot of reptiles that require heat, I go a halogen heat lamp with the UVB fixture right beside it. It's very important. Most people put it on the opposite side of the tank. You need your UVB and heat to be right next to each other. Again though, you can place the LED anywhere on top, it doesn't really matter. I like to have my light spread out, so I do put it on the opposite end of the heat and UVB, but you can put it in the middle. It's not gonna matter as long as you have the light shining in the tank. So onto arid enclosures. Most people get scared that it will be too dry and not humid enough for plants and the cleanup crew to survive. I'm here to tell you, there is a formula and it does go against most care guides, but it works. And it mimics nature way more doing it this way. So for my arid environments, I do extremely deep substrate of peat moss, organic topsoil, and play sand. The mix is similar to a tropical, but it's 50% peat moss, 10 to 15% topsoil, and the rest is play sand. And then I cover that with a gravel substrate. You can buy it on Chewy, it's called Exoterra Stone Desert. The stones will kind of blanket it and keep the bottom substrate from losing too much humidity, but that's where rocks, small grinded leaves, or Timothy hay from my Uromastics come into play. I also use cork bark for hides, but the stone and cork bark is extremely helpful to keep moisture in the bottom layer of substrate, and it's also extremely helpful for the isopods and springtails to hide and not dry up and die. For example, if you look at my enclosures, they're very dry. They get like 20% humidity, and if you notice, they are extremely hot. These are Uromastics enclosures. The basking spot is 120 to 125 degrees. The ambient air temperature is in the high 90s. But when I lift up this cork bark, it's gonna be teeming with isopods. They're all over the enclosure, but they're just hidden, trying to stay away from the heat, and under the cork bark and stones, it's very moist. Same with my bearded dragon enclosures. It looks very dry, but you lift up a rock, it's moist, and isopods are fleeing. So back to humidity, you don't have to worry about it being too humid for your desert lizards. Most lizards that live in deserts live in moist microclimates around the desert, where yes, it is very hot and it is extremely dry, but around rocks, under rocks, and crevices, there is a little bit of moisture they're clinging onto. And the heat lamps will dry out the air and keep the humidity down. That's why it's very important to have leaf litter, stones, and stuff to trap and keep the humidity in the bottom part of the soil. For my arid tanks, I do 5 to 6 inches of substrate, including the stone on top. Like I said earlier in the video though, the substrate will start to dry out, and that's when you need to drench it and have it soak up some water. You can spray it to mimic natural rainfall, or you can just get a cup and just dump it all over the substrate. The best way I can tell it needs water is when plants start to wilt and look like they're dying. You throw some water in there, they pop right back up. Plants you can use in arid enclosures are succulents. I like to grow some grass using millet seeds and lentils, and they have this nice grass look that when they die, or if they start to die and they dry up, it looks like a very nice desert look. Again, look up which succulents plants are toxic to your animals and stay away from those. And that's how I maintain and make all of my bioactive terrariums. It's super easy and anyone can do it. It looks amazing when it's done and grows in after a couple of months. And I hope I helped you and gave you some helpful information that will lead you to have a beautiful bioactive tank for your animal. If you have any questions, you can join my Discord. It's linked in the description. You could go in there. We talk about everything from animals, lizards, to video games. If you did enjoy the video, like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.